Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome or welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to take a look at Cisco Thousand Eyes and how it pertains to your SD-WAN environment. So I'll take you through the SD-WAN lab that we've been working through and show you how you can get some Thousand Eyes agents into the environment and kind of simulate a real world deployment. So without any further ado, let's hop right in. So this is the document that you'll find on Cisco's website on how to configure Thousand Eyes on SD-WAN devices, okay? So if we scroll down, we can see that uh, it's going to focus around vManage, vBond, vSmart. Again, we have all the controllers deployed in the environment. They're actually using a 4451X to do this demonstration. And again, they're relying on the TE agent 4.3.0. Now, again, the lab that I'm working through is all virtual. So I'm using 8 KVs. So I won't actually be able to containerize the instance of the Thousand Eyes agent, but I will show you how Cisco Modeling Labs CML can give you the same kind of feature set functionality without the hardware devices in play. So first thing they want you to do is download the TE agent. So again, I'm going to show you how to kind of get around some of this, but I want to take you through the example case that they have here because it's real world, right? So if you go over to the Thousand Eyes instance, which we're going to hop over to in a second, they tell you to go under Enterprise Agents and essentially download the tar file that you're going to need to upload to vManage or Manager. So let's go ahead and hop over to Thousand Eyes. And if we go under Network App Synthetics and we go to Agent Settings, and what we're going to focus on is we're going to say add a new enterprise agent, okay? When we add a new enterprise agent, there is multiple tabs across the top. We're going to look under Cisco devices, and these are all the devices that you can deploy the agent to, right? So in the example that the site where the documentation that we're reading off of, right, we're going to actually add this to a Catalyst routing instance, okay? For their example, it says install as a container on Cisco ISR and ASR, so that would be indicative of the case that the documentation is saying because it's a 4451. But in this particular case, it would be more pertinent to say it's going to go on a Cisco Catalyst 8K. Again, I'm using virtual. We're just going to simulate this. But if you click on Catalyst routing, notice the group token. We'll come back to this in a few minutes. But all we need to do at the moment is just download the tar file. So we download the tar file, which will then upload to Manager, okay? Which I've already downloaded the file, so I don't need to download it again. And then when we go to deploy this, this is essentially the script, if you will, or the command set that will be run on the router itself, okay? So we download the file, and then what we need to do is come over to Manager, okay? And when you go to Maintenance, Software Repository, Virtual Images, okay, what we want to do is we want to add a new virtual image and we want to select Manager, okay? And all we need to do is point the upload to the file we just downloaded. And when we do that, it should appear as an available file to deploy to the WAN environment. So again, hopping back to the documentation, that's all they've kind of explained here is go to the software repository, upload that image, right? Same thing we just saw. And then from that point, you'll be able to attach it to templates. So let's take a look at that now. So we'll hop back over to the manager. And if we go to configuration, classic templates, what they're saying to do is under the device template, which you can see I have a branch single router template defined. So let's go in and edit that. And if we scroll down to other, or additional, I should say, this is where we run into the issue with the 8000 virtual series routers. Okay, so under additional templates, you can see there's no option for Thousand Eyes. Okay, so when you go back to the documentation, you can see that there's clearly an option for Thousand Eyes agent. So let me show you the difference here. So let's cancel the 8000V device template. Let's create a new one. And instead of saying an 8000V, let's just say 4451, which was the example the documentation has. And none of this stuff really matters. It's just a matter of me showing you where the option lives. So we'll just say 4451, 4451. And if we scroll down, this is the difference, okay? So under additional, right, you have an option for Thousand Eyes Agent, okay? And under Thousand Eyes Agent, this is where they want you to create the template. And you give it a name and a description, and you can see this is where we would now define whether we want to globally set this variable to be the same token or we want to define this specifically each time we do the deployment. So again, going back to the documentation, this is where we're at, right? So they show you, okay, this is where you put your token in from the Thousand Eyes portal. You define your VPN, your agent IP, all that. These are the settings that will get deployed to the router container, which will then the agent will talk back to the Thousand Eyes instance, and away you go. So there is a way to simulate this with Cisco Modeling Labs, since again, we're using virtual devices. So if I go back to my lab, so let's cancel out of here. And if we go back to my Cisco Modeling Labs, this is the lab that we've been using since the first video of the series, okay? And we're gonna be focused on San Jose down in the bottom left. So what I did was I replaced the virtual PC emulators with an agent, a Thousand Eyes agent, and an external connector. So what do I mean by that? So when you go to add node in Cisco Modeling Labs and you scroll down, you have an option for a Thousand Eyes agent. So you would drag this Thousand Eyes agent over to your topology, and when you click on it, under the config section, there is there's the setting here. It says, what's your account token? Okay. So this is where you go back to your Thousand Eyes tenant, you grab your token, and you literally just paste it in here. All right. Once you do that and you provide connectivity to the agent, it should then appear as an available agent in your Thousand Eyes instance. So I'm going to delete this because we don't need it. And all I've done is here under the, I renamed it to be San Jose agent, okay? And obviously I went in and I changed the token to be what my token is in my tenant, okay? When you do that, and this agent has connectivity to the outside world, it will check in with Thousand Eyes. So that is for the enterprise agent. So this is essentially simulating the containerized instance that you would run on a Catalyst switch, Catalyst router, ISR, ASR, whatever it is you have. This is simulating that behavior, okay? Enterprise agent. Below that, I have external connectivity, which is just a bridged connection, same as what I've been using for some of these other clouds. And all this is doing is just passing a VLAN 13 through my virtual environment through the same ESXi host that is hosting this lab. And it's just a virtual machine. I spun up a Windows 10 virtual machine that I can deploy the endpoint agent to, okay? So I'm simulating two different things here, the enterprise agent and an endpoint agent, okay? So let's go back to Thousand Eyes. And if I go to network and app synthetics, this is going to be where your enterprise agent configuration settings are. If I go to views, you can see that I have some tests set up. So we're going to walk through kind of what I did in this environment. Okay. So first and foremost, when you go to test settings, this is where you would define your test. So if I want to add a new test, I come over to the top right and I can pick from the list, okay, what kind of test do I want to create? So I did a couple tests in my scenario here. So I did agent to server for google.com. So this is a good way to test like your direct internet access, internet connectivity, that type of thing. I've also configured a second test called RTP host, and it's an ICMP test to a host living in Research Triangle Park within my lab. So if we go back to the lab really quickly, so from these agents on the left, I'm actually testing through the WAN, right, over to this RTP web host that I defined. This is the host that has that 10.4.10.99 IP address, okay? So this is going to be able to test my connectivity through the WAN and determine where there's latency loss, jitter, that type of thing. So if we come back to Thousand Eyes, that's the RTP host. And then last but not least, I created an HTTP test to the certificate authority in my environment. So this is the domain controller with the certificate authority role that's handling the certs inside of the SD-WAN environment. I chose it because I know that it has HTTP running, and it's just a good example use case to throw out there to test, HTTP server test inside the environment. So again, you would add a new test. You can go ahead and define that. So for example, if I said agent to server, literally all you do is you give it a target. So you can see these are cached from the other two tests I created. So you would put an IP or an FQDN, right? Give it an optional name, and then you can select the parameters you want to test with. So how often do you want to run the test? Which agents do you want to deploy this test to? Is it TCP or ICMP, right? And you can go through and define all of the settings or attributes that you want this test to have. When you're happy, you hit deploy, and it will deploy that test inside of your tenant and apply it to whatever agents you want to apply it to. So again, I have the 3 tests already created and built, and they've been running. The reason I wanted them there is to kind of have some historical data to go through this video on, right? So if you go back to views, up here on the drop down, this is where you're going to zoom in on which test you want to look at. So right now it's looking at google.com, okay, the agent to server test. And right now we can see we're looking at the metric for loss, okay? We can look at latency. Now it's going to show you the latency, okay? We can look at jitter, and again, very similar view. It's going to tell us if there's any issues. And what we're looking at here is a 24-hour view. You can zoom out to 7 days or 14 days. I have not had these tests running that long, so for 24 hours, this is perfectly fine for me. But you can go back historically and try to determine, okay, what was the issues my end users or my applications were facing. So let's just go back to, let's go to latency. And we can see if we come down here to the path visualization, and if we hover over any of these bullet points, we'll get the information that pertains to that particular hop or that node inside the network. All right. So we can see private address, public address, location. We can see all the details as far as the loss, latency, jitter as it pertains to this particular hop inside the network. If we go to the link, we can see now it's telling us some statistics as far as this particular link. And we can literally go through each hop of our network, whether it's our own or not owned, and we can determine where the issue or issues may be occurring. All right. So you can see when I get over to Google here, obviously I don't manage the Google infrastructure, but I can still see DSCP values, I can see prefixes, I can see all of the attributes affiliated with these hops, which is a pretty powerful thing, right? So you can also see if I hover over here and I go to BGP view, for example, and we scroll down, we can actually see kind of that um, BGP view, kind of that looking glass kind of view where we can see, okay, who's Google peered with, what are the paths that we have, and we can really start to drill in and see, everything that pertains to that path visualization in that transport, right? So we're not going to get too deep into this. We're just looking at kind of we're just scratching the surface here. But let's go back to google.com to main test, and let's go to loss. Actually, let's go to latency. Okay, and let's have a little fun here. So SJC Enterprise Agent, right? So let's go back to our topology. So we know that that agent is running here, right? We know that it's hopping through the switch, the router, through the internet to get to Google, all right? Let's introduce some problems and see what happens here. Let's click on the link to, uh, let's click on this link to the internet. Let's do it here. So we're going to add some latency. I'm going to add 300 milliseconds of latency to that link. We can see we have the little icon that shows that we're now introducing latency to that particular link. And with any luck, if we head over to Thousand Eyes, and if we refresh this, we should see some issues with the link once it catches up here. And you can zoom in, right? So if I just kind of drag my mouse over and I zoom in, we can see that as of, it's 10:18 a.m., right? So literally we can see based on our network statistics here that we were doing fine on latency, 17, 18, whatever. And now we have a jump that went up to 622 milliseconds. Okay, so we can start to zoom in and determine where we have latency issues and on which link they're happening on, okay? So again, if we highlight these connections or these nodes inside the hops, we can see right out of the gate, we're experiencing 622 milliseconds, okay? And we can easily pinpoint where in the transit path that issue is occurring, okay? So let's go ahead and move it just to see that this tracks right. So let's go back to our lab. Let's click on this link. Let's reset that. So let's clear the latency there. Let's introduce the latency on a different hop. So let's go here. And let's see what changes we take notice of. So we'll change this to latency. Let's go ahead and refresh. Okay, so when we zoom in now, okay, so when we zoom in as before, when we clicked here, right, we could see the latency was affiliated with this particular hop within the path visualization, right? But now, if I click on where the problem is, okay, we can clearly see that this link here inside the trace is now experiencing issues. So again, I can't tell you how many hours I've spent on troubleshooting calls over my years of experience where I'm trying to prove my innocence and say that, hey, this is a brownout situation. I'm clearly seeing packet loss latency or jitter, but I can't necessarily determine on which hop it is, right? A tool like Thousand Eyes, given this example, you can now point the finger exactly where the hop is that's causing you issues. So let's go ahead and clear that. So we'll go ahead and reset. And in a second or two, that will update and we should see everything go green. In the meantime, let's come back to views. And let's look at the RTP host. So just to kind of give you a different example here. So now we're just looking at WAN traffic. So again, we go back to the topology. This particular case, we're going from the San Jose agent outside, or we leave San Jose, we ride the WAN, we come over to Research Triangle Park, and now we're essentially in the LAN of RTP. So you can see based on our hops, we are sitting at 10.3.10.102, which is in San Jose, okay? We leave San Jose, that's our default gateway. We now ride looks like the internet transport to get over to uh, Research Triangle Park, and we can now see that we are in 10.4.10.99. There's no issues per se with this particular flow, but this will give us yet another kind of triangulation of path visualization to indicate whether we're having issues across our WAN transports. If we look at the HTTP server test, so this is a test I set up for, if we go back to test settings and we look at the SD-WAN certificate authority. So what I've done here is I've pointed it to my domain controller that's running the certificate authority role, right? I know that it has HTTP enabled, so I went ahead and did TCP for the test, and I'm just kind of choosing all the auto settings, right? And I created the test. So what this shows me now, so if I go back in here, whoops, sorry, if I go to views and I pull down the SD-WAN CA test, okay, what I should see is for availability, I now see that I'm getting my 200 okay, all right, because I'm testing HTTP, okay. I know that that website is up and accessible and all is well. So if you've got critical applications that sit in your DMZ, wherever they may sit, and you need to verify their availability, right, you can use Thousand Eyes for that testing as well. So again, you can now start to rule out, is it a network problem? Is it an application problem? And you can quickly and efficiently tell the difference between the two. So there are just a couple example cases as far as what the Thousand Eyes Enterprise Agent can do as far as your network and app synthetic testing. All right. Now I did make mention of the endpoint uh, agent that I have deployed as well. So again, if we go back to the topology, everything we've been discussing so far has been centered around the San Jose Enterprise Agent. But now let's take a peek at VLAN 13, which is a Windows device that is running the Endpoint agent. All right. So if we go back to Thousand Eyes and we go to Endpoint Experience and we go to Agent Settings, we have the San Jose PC01. You can see logged in as Mogi. It is a Windows device, Windows 10 to be specific. And you can see that it is running the endpoint agent, okay? So if we come over to endpoint experience, and let's just click on overview. Now, there's not a lot of data here. I actually just fired up this agent in the last couple minutes. But what we will get in the overview page is your experience score, right? So it'll score the endpoint experience as far as that user's experience goes, and it'll display any and all tests that you have affiliated with that agent as well. So if we go to views, agent views. So again, this is running on that PC, right? If we click on the system and we scroll down, again, it'll give us, you can zoom in and determine any of the attributes you want to look at, right? We can look at the agent score. If we want to look at, let's say, the CPU or the memory, let's just highlight a few. Okay, so we can see, right, it will now graph the CPU utilization, the memory utilization, it'll give us the score. So now we can start to correlate issues or the experience with the endpoint device itself, right? Was there a CPU spike? Is that why they had an issue with WebEx or Teams or whatever the case may be, right? Was there high memory utilization? You can start to correlate that data very easily and efficiently. Scrolling down, we can see the segment visualization. So very similar to what we saw on the enterprise agent with the network, right? We can start to see, okay, let's look at the gateway, right? Did we have issues prior to the default gateway of that network, right? Were there issues going to the internet side, or was it an application issue? In this particular case, right, again, some of this data is skewed because the tests aren't really set up right, but just kind of give you an idea that this would be indicative of the network is perfectly fine. However, when you get to the application layer, there is obviously some issues with the application side of the house. So again, this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to Thousand Eyes. And this was more kind of centered around the power of Thousand Eyes when you combine it with the SD-WAN solution, right? You can push the agents to your networking devices, or you can run the endpoint agents on uh, the laptops that are in the environment, and you can really start to prove your innocence and get that telemetry data that you really want, right? Make that digital experience monitoring easy. So I hope this was informative. I hope you got something out of this, and I hope to see you on future videos. Take care.